Welcome everybody. Good morning to the many of you who are joining us today in the US, and good afternoon and good evening to those of you who are joining us from elsewhere around the world. My name is Susie Thompson and I am the Director of Development and Alumni Relations for the University of Liverpool. We are absolutely delighted that we have over 1,000 of you joining us on our call today. The huge popularity of this event is no doubt testament to our fantastic speaker, James Quincey. And indeed, only our Q&A with Carlo Ancelotti, the former Everton manager, has ever had more sign-ups, and I am sure James would understand that it is pretty impossible to go up against a football manager, even an Everton one, and win in Liverpool. We are thrilled to be joined today by James Quincey, who is the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the Coca-Cola Company and proud alumnus of the University of Liverpool. I'm going to leave it to our interviewer today, Dr. Brian Jones, to formally introduce James. I simply wanted to thank James and indeed Brian on behalf of the university. This event is the start of what we hope will be a series of events to relaunch our US Alumni Association. When I joined the university last summer, Brian was one of the first alumni that I spoke to. He has spent many years supporting the US alumni activity tirelessly, and he was very, very keen that we started to build up that activity again after a few years of hiatus. We're excited to be doing that today, and we are thrilled that this platform gives us the opportunity to reach so many of you easily. We have you joined from all over the world and indeed all over the US. So we have a community of nearly 3,000 alumni all over the States. And we're very interested to hear from you with what you would find interesting and valuable from your alumni association. At the end of the talk today, my colleague Andy Harrison, who's our International Alumni Engagement Manager, is going to talk to you about some of the plans we have for the US Association. And I would urge you all to get in touch with Andy or myself if you're interested in getting more involved. You're going to be able to post your questions for James throughout the session today, so please do add those questions into the Q&A box at the bottom. Andy is then going to be able to read those out for you at the end of the main interview. And as a reminder, the event today is being recorded. Alumni are the largest, and I believe the most important group of stakeholders that this university has. You can impact the life of this institution in so many ways, and indeed you do. Alumni support our students by offering them placements, mentoring our students, giving inspiring talks. You employ fellow graduates and you help us recruit the next generation of students. You are a 270,000 strong community based in 187 countries, making the University of Liverpool a truly globally connected university. You also support us philanthropically, and that is so, so important to this university. Alumni gifts have helped establish new research institutes. You've transformed and improved our campus. You have established scholarships which ensure that more students can access the brilliant education on offer at this university. I believe you are at the heart of the future of the university, and it's our job to ensure that your relationship with your alma mater is a good one. So please, please, please do give us your feedback. We're actually going to be sending out a survey this year, and I would encourage all of you to share your views with us when you see that arrive. Now, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to Dr. Brian Jones. Brian attended the university from 1958 to 1965. He received a Bachelor's Engineering First Class Honours in 1961 and then went on to get his PhD in 1964, and both of those were in mechanical engineering. Brian, you can correct me if I get any of this wrong now. He served as a lecturer prior to coming to the US to work for McDonnell Douglas Aircraft. His career has been almost exclusively in the aerospace industry, beginning with a 5-year engineering apprenticeship with de Havilland Aircraft. He recently retired as executive vice president of a company he founded in 1974, being sequentially owned by a number of well-known companies, including Shell Chemical, Kaiser or Aerospace and Electronics, and BAE Systems, Inc. Brian has been involved with the Alumni Association for nearly 2 decades, including being US Alumni Ambassador and a former member of the board of the University of Liverpool Foundation in America, Inc. Brian lives in San Gabriel, near Los Angeles, with his wife, Debbie. So it's always an enviably sunny backdrop when you speak to Brian on Zoom. His indefatigable support for the US Alumni Association is truly humbling, and we are very, very grateful to Brian for his time today, and indeed for his many years of service to the US alumni community of this university. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you to all of my very many University of Liverpool colleagues who have made this event possible behind the scenes. Thank you to James, thank you to Brian, and Brian, it gives me great pleasure to hand things over to you.
Susie, thank you very much for your very kind introduction. First, I would like to add my welcome to that of Susie, to all the alumni, and others who have joined us for this event today. I'd also like to thank our distinguished speaker and proud University of Liverpool graduate, of course we're all proud University of Liverpool graduates, for supporting this event with his very valuable time. By the way, for those of us in the USA, this is something of a marquee event. It's the first time we've been able to participate in a webinar of this type. But as befits this occasion, we are very privileged to have a marquee speaker, Mr. James Quincey, CEO and Chairman of the Board of the Coca-Cola Company, one of the most recognizable companies, if not the most recognizable company in the world. James received an honors degree from our university in electronic engineering in 1986. After a period working in the consulting arena, he joined Coca-Cola in 1996, became Chief Operating Officer and President in 2015, CEO in 2017, and CEO and Chairman of the Board in 2019. I'm quite sure that James will provide additional details on his very distinguished career, covering many continents, by the way, during the course of his talk, which promises to be really fascinating. So maybe we can start now, James, if that's okay with you. Thank you. Okay, we'll start at the beginning. I know that you spent some of your early years when you were a small boy in the US. And I believe your father had an academic position at the Dartmouth College in Hanover. I'm sure you don't remember many memories from that time, but then the family came back to the UK. And how did things develop for the family and you from that point on? Where did you go to school and so on?
Yeah, so as you say, at a very young age, I did go over to the US following my father. I had to when I was 18 months old, and I managed to acquire my first frequent flyer card that year when before British Airways existed, and it was still BOAC, which probably, Brian, you're the only other person on this video call to be able to remember BOAC. And so I did go to the US for a few years then. But we returned within 3 years back to the UK, and I basically grew up in Birmingham. I went to school there, and I did what many people did in those days, and still very much in the UK system. At 16, you have to essentially choose between art subjects and science subjects, and so that's the road I went down, and kind of spent my childhood in Birmingham. So kind of a small circuitous route through New Hampshire, of which there's very little record other than the odd pictures of lots and lots of snow.
Okay, well, this is a good time to ask you the next question. When did you start to develop an interest in electrical and electronic engineering? And then, of course, very important question, what led you to choose the University of Liverpool? And maybe what are some of your memories of that time? But certainly, please tell us how you got interested in electronic engineering and then chose Liverpool.
Yeah, as I said, I kind of went down the science route with the kind of maths, physics, and chemistry at A level. And remembering that in '86, really the consumer consciousness about electronics was really just starting. Of course, one could argue electronics came into being through the 40s and 50s and in the 60s. But really, the first kind of games consoles, the first computers were just starting to emerge in the early 80s in any kind of sense from a consumer point of view. And you know, I had an insight about the future of the world, that electronics were going to be the future. As it turns out, at the end of the story, it wasn't going to be designed by me. But certainly at that point, when I was still at school, I very much felt that, you know, that what was going to be made possible by electronics was going to be profoundly impact the way we led our lives in all sorts of different ways. And so when I looked for what to do at university, I had this idea of electronic engineering. Of course, in those days, it was pre-internet and pre-World Wide Web. So the amount of information available in universities was kind of what you had in your school's careers library, necessarily relatively limited. And one of the things that was true in those days was actually Liverpool was one of the first places to really offer electronic engineering in combination. Actually, it was in combination when they started with electrical engineering, and that was a relatively new thing. It was not the case that lots and lots of people were into it. And so as I looked at universities, I looked at a whole series of them, but Liverpool was one of the few to offer electronics so overtly. And so that was part of the attraction. I think it would also be fair to say that, you know, as you go up for the open day, the department and the university did a nice job of making it appealing and open, and the various students I met did a great job too. And one cannot discount in life that, you know, part of it is the content, and part of it is the ambiance and the people you meet. And the university did a good job in those days of putting it all together. And so I came up to Liverpool to do electronics. And my memories of those days are actually very fond memories of the course, but also, of course, of living in Liverpool. And for those who don't remember the 80s in Liverpool, you know, we think of today as politically troubled and fractious. Well, the 80s were pretty feisty as well. With the early 80s started with riots. The middle 80s had polarizing mayor in Liverpool in the shape of Derek Hatton. The miners' strike. So there was a lot of things to get involved with at the university, both in terms of the course, the social, and the general political environment. So it was a great time to be at Liverpool. I have very fond memories. I'm the only thing that I'm somewhat regretting is I went back to Liverpool the other day and I saw the Casbah had been turned into some sort of themed version of its slightly more rebellious and underground starting.
Okay, so what did you do immediately after graduating and in the years before joining Coca-Cola? And how did your degree in electronic engineering help you arrive at where you are today? I mean, that's to me a fascinating story in itself. But what did you do between graduating and joining the Coca-Cola company?
Yeah, so basically between Liverpool and joining Coke, I worked for a couple of consulting firms, but basically spent 10 plus years in the consulting industry. And I think what the electronics degree prepared me for, I mean, firstly, I concluded, having done the degree, that there are a lot of people on the course were much better at designing and much better at electronics than I was. And so many of them went off to be engineers and I decided not to be. But the thing it did prepare me for, which I think is true of a lot of courses, is it gave me a great grounding in the disciplines of science and research and doing analysis and preparing arguments, whether it be the write-up of the experiments or whatever. And so that was all actually very useful as I joined consulting. And I think that's relevant today. I mean, when I joined consulting, it was just, as I said, at the beginning of the emergence of computers in the workplace. Most workplaces did not have personal computers in the mid-80s, and consulting firms used those to help clients with data analysis that they couldn't do themselves. I think nowadays, you know, people who with a scientific or numeric background going into all sorts of aspects of AI and data science, again, there's another wave where those skills can help bring tremendous value to enterprises and to broader society. So that was the thing that launched me into consulting. Then, as it turned out, I was good not just at the numbers and analysis, but the more general skills of leading people, of putting teams together, of being able to articulate a leadership narrative, if you like. And that got me to be successful in consulting, not just in the UK, but I spent some time in Hong Kong and then latterly in the US.
I suspect most of us are thinking of that, are really intrigued about how you ended up getting a major leadership position with the Coca-Cola company, given what you just described. So could you please tell us about that? That's fascinating to me.
Yeah, there are a number of industries or careers where they reach a certain point, and this is very true of consulting, where you either stay in it for a very long time or you get out. And in consulting, that tends to be after you've done 10 or 15 years. At that point, it's relatively possible or even attractive to move over to the corporate side or move into some other or aspect of business, and kind of there's a bridge there that corporations often have, so that they can bring over successful people who've been successful in various industries, including consulting, bring them onto the corporate side and see if they will work out in a more general management sense, because they tend to have a great broad training of looking at lots of industries and are more in tune with, or are very in tune with, the kind of leadership perspective of running corporations. And that's the point at which I got to in my 30s. And it so happened, and this is true of life too, by luck and by chance, the Coke company happened to be looking to bring in a cohort of new blood. It's a successful company, and many successful companies, people stay a long time, and they wanted to bring in some new blood. So it just so happened by chance, they were looking for an influx of people with the sorts of experience I had. And I was at that stage in my career where I had to decide, did I want to stay in consulting, or did I want to go and try something on the corporate side? And so that's how it came together. And the essential idea was, come and do some internal consulting stuff effectively, and we'll give you a shot at being a general manager if you're not too crazy.
Well, I think you defined luck very nicely there. They say luck is where preparedness and opportunity meet, and that clearly was the case here. I have to believe that the responsibility for leading a company that has sales, north of 35 billion, I know you just had a terrific third quarter, and you employ well over 80,000, and that doesn't include your bottling entities. The responsibility must be never ending. How would you describe leading such a large and famous company? And maybe what do you do to sort of relax somewhat from the pressures of such a significant job?
Yeah, look, the bigger the enterprise, for me, the more it puts the onus on the clarity of the message and the clarity of the priorities you set. When you get to very senior management levels, you all know this, when you get to senior management level, particularly when you get to CEO, there are lots of sayings that people tell you, and most of them turn out to be true. And one of them, which is, you'll be bored of your message before anyone has understood it. One has to understand that when you employ 80,000 people, or in our franchise system, including our bottling partners, that's over 700,000 people, trying to get the super tanker to change is not just a question of issuing the odd instruction and going off to have a rest or whatever. There is a relentlessness of trying to set the agenda and the direction for the enterprise that obviously involves repetition, but in order for it to be repeated, it has to be very clear. And so the first leadership task is actually having that precision, that clarity of where you want to take the organization. Then there are lots of things that come afterwards, obviously in terms of the team and managing the day-to-day, but being clear on where you want to go and being able to communicate that broadly is a critical starting point.
Right.
And as it relates to relaxing, I enjoy lots of things. I have to say that I enjoy skiing a lot. It's the right time of year, and certainly hasn't been possible for the last few years. Clearly, it's not so easy to ski in Atlanta, Georgia. There are no hills and certainly very rarely any snow. So I have to go somewhere else, but that would be top of my list.
I noticed you were in Colorado last week. I was tempted to ask you then whether you'd been skiing.
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
The snow was good.
Okay. Given what you just said, I suspect there's never a typical day in your life. But if you had to describe what we'll call a composite typical day, what sort of things do you have to deal with? And I'm very interested to know, the COVID pandemic must have posed specific challenges to a company like yours, which has operations on every part of the planet. So how did your typical day get influenced by the pressures of dealing with that?
Well, the first thing that happened, like everyone else, is I stopped moving around and started getting on all these Zooms and Teams calls. As an aside, as it happened in my home, by pure chance, I had fiber optic cable installed in the January, so I was perfectly prepared for all this work. So the first thing that COVID did was it reduced greatly the amount of travel and massively increased, like everyone else, the amount of looking at a small screen to communicate with people as we're doing now. But you know, the COVID thing, I think that one interesting piece of that is we, the senior leadership, you know, spent the first kind of couple of months of the crisis, of course, providing direction to the organization, because as I said, a large organization, you spend a lot of time trying to convince it that the priorities are A, B, and C and get it to go in a particular direction. And then, of course, a crisis comes along and greatly changes those priorities. And therefore, you have to be more directive and more assertive in saying, like, no, in this moment of the crisis, we want a different set of priorities. We want to look after, ensure people's safety, continuity of supply, and then, you know, donations to the community. But very quickly, from the corporate center, we said, look, we need to leave the people on the ground to manage the dynamics. We can go there. It's very, you know, it's hard to communicate. They're on the ground. They know what to do, and we need to free them up to manage the crisis in the day-to-day, and we will focus on what will arrive, which is the post-COVID, or at least the endemic stage of COVID, when growth will return and everyone will try to kind of invest and grow all their businesses again. And we need to make sure we're as ready as possible for that. And so we had a kind of a dual track of both managing the crisis and preparing ourselves for the long term, and the way the growth and the marketplace was going to be different. And so we kind of had that dual track process going on.
As we seem to be doing okay on time, I think I'll ask you maybe a couple of questions that we had as sort of backups to speak. What do you see then as the main challenges facing your company in the next 5 to 10 years? I know this is a classic question everybody asks, but I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say. Yeah,
the first reality for the Coke business is it's never any one thing. It's a business that's in, you know, every country bar 2, and it covers the world. So our challenges, you know, range across the spectrum. Clearly, it starts with the people who drink our drinks, where they're going to drink those drinks, how they're engaging with marketing activities and consumption of content in which we were sponsoring or whatever. That is changing profoundly. I mean, remember, for example, in COVID, half of the Cokes that get sold around the world are sold in some sort of away from home occasion, whether it's at a train station, a pub, a restaurant, a cafe, a cruise line or an airline or whatever. Half of the Cokes pre-COVID was sold away from the home, which obviously became tremendously complicated in all the lockdowns of COVID. And so where people are and how their behavior changes in terms of what they consume is an ever evolving dynamic. And our challenge, of course, is one, to engage with them in ways that are relevant for them in a marketing sense, but also to make sure the product's where they want it to be. And so that is under a tremendous amount of evolution. The second thing that is changing profoundly is the digitization of everything. It's no longer just, you know, are you marketing through social media? The entire business system, entire business systems are being digitized in very profound ways that are going to look tremendously different in 10 years' time. And I think the one is, and the last one I would call out is what's commonly referred to as ESG, or environmental, social, and governance. and the agenda, whether it's the things that kind of fall under climate change and how that then, you know, comes down into your business, the focus that we have increasingly put on that over the last 10, 20 years is only going to continue to increase, whether it's the things that are most core to our business, like water and packaging, or our role as part of a community. The whole ESG agenda is going to continue to change profoundly over the next 5 to 10 years.
Well, that's a sort of nice segue. I know that you've been very much at the forefront of a initiative within your company and maybe the industry to do the best you can to rid the world of plastic, which I think everybody appreciates. How's that going? Yeah,
I mean, ultimately it's one of the things most intrinsic to our business is that you can get it in a container. Without containers, we're not going anywhere. And so ultimately our strategy that we adopted was we want a world without waste. And that idea of a world without waste has two components to it. One that's particularly true of packaging is the waste should not get into the environment. There's a lot of plastic in the ocean. Some of it is bottles, some of it is other types of plastic. But we want to make sure the waste doesn't get into the environment. And that's particularly true of plastic. The other is we don't want to see waste because actually all those packaging materials have an intrinsic value, whether we're talking about a can, aluminum or a steel can, whether we're talking about a glass bottle, or whether we're talking about a PET plastic bottle. All of those have intrinsic economic values that if we can recover them, actually they can be returned and remade into a new bottle or can. And so we can, and that's important, not just because obviously it reduces the amount of waste in the environment, but also a recovered package remade and recycled into a new package has a radically lower carbon footprint, and of course, logically, uses far less natural resources. So our focus, we said we wanted by 2030 to recover a bottle or can for every one we sell, and to see it all recycled and to use at least half that recycled material ourselves. We already have some countries where all the plastic bottles are made from recycled plastic. So it's a very doable ambition, but it's very much part of our ESG agenda to achieve a world without waste. And we're going to work with a lot of other manufacturers, retail, governments to make it happen. But it's very doable.
Wonderful to hear. Okay, then for current students who are with us today, and based upon your experience, what general advice would you give them now and after they've graduated in terms of your experience and your wonderful career?
I think a couple of things. One, I think it's very important that people think through, what is it that they really actually have a passion to do? Because in my experience, people who do things that they're really passionate about, in the most simple terms, get up earlier in the morning, put in more effort, and are much more likely to succeed at doing what they're doing if they really care and are interested in what they're doing. And so, sometimes people get distracted, well, shall I have a career in this or a career in that? But a career in what actually motivates you and energizes you the most is a much surer path to doing well in it than any other form of motivation. Of course, the thing you're motivated by may or may not pay well. And one has to, or may or may not have long hours or short hours. And in doing so, the famous work-life balance comes in. There's no perfect answer. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. Some people might want to work 40 hours because they have other hobbies that they're very passionate about. Others might be happy working much harder because that's the thing they really care about. But being at one and at peace with that, the balance you choose, I think is really important. No guarantee of success, but certainly much more likely to lead to success and happiness.
Nicely said. Well, finally, then, what would be the highlights of your career so far? You don't have to include this event in that group, by the way.
Yeah, a highlight of career. Look, I always took each job. I mean, sometimes people ask me, did you have a career plan and these sorts of things? And the answer is I did not. As poor an idea as that sounds, what I did is I focused on the things that I was interested in, and so I've had the pleasure of having a career that has allowed me to strike the work-life balance that worked for me, and also have a lot of wonderful experiences along the way, both professional and the things that go along with working at great brands like Coca. I mean, they've allowed me the opportunity of living all around the world, in Asia, in South America, in the US. And so, I'm not sure I would pull out one thing as saying it's the pinnacle, except to say it's afforded me the opportunity to lead a rich and enjoyable and interesting life.
Well, James, this has been, for me, I'm sure for everybody else, a fascinating discussion. Again, we really appreciate the time that you've given us, because I know your time is extremely valuable. So with that, I'd like to thank you again. I've enjoyed it immensely, and turn the meeting over to Andy Harrison in Liverpool, if you have time for a few questions from the more distinguished audiences out there somewhere. So Andy, it's over to you.
Thank you, Brian, and yeah, thank you to James for answering those questions. It's absolutely fascinating, so thank you, James. We are getting lots of questions in from our audience members, which we're really grateful, so thank you for them. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll get opportunity to get through them all, so I'm just going to pick out a few messages that are coming in, if that's okay. And the first one comes from Kevin W, who says, "Hi James, how does the supply chain distribution and the rise of inflation, how is that impacting Coca-Cola?"
Sure. I mean, inflation is impacting everyone. Obviously, there's as the price of materials we need to buy goes up, we, like every other business, will pass those through through prices over time to the consumers. I think the other thing to mention is there's a great deal of question still in the business community as to how enduring this kind of supply chain inflation will be. You can make, I'll give you the conundrum, which is, pre-COVID, there wasn't supply chain inflation. There wasn't, it was at a lower level. Now it's at a high level. So the capacity to make whatever you read in the newspaper, whether it's microchips or whatever, all of that existed pre-COVID, and yet here we are, semi-post-COVID, and we're talking about inflation, and part of it is being driven by demand over capacity, and so you get the question: well, where did the capacity go? I mean, demand doesn't seem to be, in general terms, from a GDP point of view, greatly higher than 2019, and yet we have all these constraints. So I think people are trying to work through, well, is this just a percentage of the workforce is off sick with COVID and therefore capacity is temporarily reduced, or are there some longer term structural factors at play that means inflation is going to be more enduring? I mean, this morning, the head of the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund, who basically owns 1.5% of every company on the planet, came out and said he thinks that the inflation is going to be more enduring. So it's very understandable why we have inflation in the short term. The great question is it going to be there over a more extended period of time or not, and why? And I'm not sure anyone knows the answer yet.
Okay, thank you, James. Our next question is from Jordan Howie, who asks, how has your experience of working across continents impacted your management of a global company? Managing across continents is ultimately about managing across cultures. The world is obviously still very diverse. As much as we think any one country is diverse, the world is even more diverse. And so therefore, being successful on a global basis does require, I think, a heightened sense of cultural awareness or cultural EQ, if you like to put it like that, because things said or done one way in one country are the way it's done, and then in another country it can be seen as very counterproductive or very rude. So I think being in a global business does require a greater sense of cultural connectivity, but it is also enriching. I love going to other parts of the world and seeing how they're different, and trying to understand how their history and how their geography and how their economies have led them to see cultures in certain ways. And I think that's been an enriching part of my whole experience and career.
Thank you, James. Our next question is from Martin Budd, who asks, on reflection, at what point of your career did you sense that you had the opportunity and potential to reach a board level role? Did you target this, or did someone chart your success?
I never targeted, like, I want to become, like I never sat down and said I want to become CEO of Coca and plot out a path to get there. Clearly I like the idea of continuing to have more successful roles and to be successful, whether that ultimately led to a board level or whatever. But that was not in the front of my mind. I think it would be fairer to say my focus was on, each time I took a job or an assignment, it's like, am I interested in doing this? Yes, is it getting me further forward without actually having a destination in mind? And so I think that was it was just, that's what happened, and that's the honest answer. Whether that is the right answer or not, I can't tell you. I think sometimes people who are overly ambitious and overly overtly ambitious end up in the kind of the politicking space, and that can be a turn off for the rest of the organization. Doesn't mean they don't get there. Plenty of people do. I'm not trying to argue that it's entirely counterproductive. It just didn't suit me. Now, having said that, the company, and we still do today, we absolutely run a process to try and identify those people who can go to the next level of managing larger and larger parts of the enterprise. And so I do know that, my predecessors sat there and went, okay, well, he's done well here. Let's move him on to a bigger challenge and see if he can do that. And because it ultimately is a funnel to try and find the next generation of people who can run any company. And for sure, that's what they were doing. And that's what we do today. I look at the pipeline of up and coming leaders, whether they aspire to be the CEO or not. And we say, well, okay, who's doing well? Who should we challenge with the next level of the next scale activity, and see if they can succeed. And over time, it becomes an ever reducing number of people who can rise to the challenge and succeed. And that's how large companies largely run the process, whether you are aspiring there or not.
Yes, thank you. The next question is from Thomas D, who asks, is there a book that you would recommend which changed your perspective and had a profound impact on you?
I read lots and lots of books. So choosing one would be an almost impossibility. But I would give you one that I read relatively recently, and I think is topical. Given the gyrations of the stock market, I always quote it to people when they ask me about investing in cryptocurrencies. And that book is a retelling of the South Sea bubble crisis, called Money for Nothing. And I think it's interesting and salutary as a book and as a history, and without spoiling the whole thing for everyone. I think it's very interesting. It makes a couple of very important points about speculative situations. One, the underlying economics will always come true. The underlying economics always come true. And that was true in the South Sea Company's case, because it wasn't just the bubble piece, it also owned a huge part of the government debt, which would produce an income stream. But the fundamentals of economics always come true. And the second piece is, in whatever speculative bubble you're in, that always ends badly, that doesn't mean people don't make money. Lots of people make tons of money. It's just that the people at the end lost their shirts, literally and figuratively. And so I think it's, as we go into very unusual times, coming out of COVID, we talked about the supply chain inflation, geopolitics, whatever. I think it's a good lesson in trying to separate the underlying structural things that are going on in the economy or in the world from the noise and from the kind of the media cycle narrative. And so the book's very good about the economics and the history of the South Sea Company. But I think it's instructive about this need to focus on what's happening structurally versus what's the noise and is temporary.
Thanks, James. The next question is from Jessica, who said, what was the biggest mindset challenge you overcame in your career, and how did you overcome it?
The biggest mindset challenge. Biggest mindset challenge. Great question. I think that I don't know. I have one that I would say was, massive, because I was always someone that, because of this kind of focus on what was interesting, I had a degree of curiosity and therefore a degree of adaptability. And so I don't think I actually kind of had to make a complete 180-degree turn on any particular aspect of my mindset. I would say, perhaps in sort of a half answer to the question, that being realistic about what you're good at and what you're not good at is continuously important. And therefore the ability to kind of take feedback and to work out, which bits of this feedback can I actually go and fix, and which bits are just true. We often spend a lot of time, or people spend a lot of time talking about strengths and weaknesses, and then start focusing on, well, how can I fix all my weaknesses? Well, the corollary of that is, well, how do I leverage my strengths? I might not be able to fix all my weaknesses. And I might just need to internalize that I'm not good at A or B, and therefore focus more on, well, how can I leverage what I'm really good at and go forward? So it's a half answer to the question, but I think this idea that, there are things you can fix and there are things you need to accept, and then build around it, I think is very important.
Fantastic, thank you. Thanks to Jess for that question as well. It was really interesting. We have a question from David Hallis, who asks, hi James, I'm about to take my first role as a CEO on a public company, much smaller than Coke, of course. What advice would you have for me?
Well, I will give you a few of the truisms that were given to me, and then one thing that I discovered for myself. The first one I've already mentioned, which is you'll be bored of your message before the people have understood it. The second one is the observation: you never meet someone who's stepping down as a CEO who said, I wish I went slower. 99% of them always go, I wish I'd gone faster. And so, sometimes what needs to be done, and hesitation creeps in, or doubt, or can the organization or the people absorb this much change? It's very rare for CEOs to conclude at the end of everything, I wish I'd gone slower, and much more frequent they go, I wish I'd gone quicker. So if you know what needs to be done, I would certainly reflect on that one. And the third thought I offer you, which is the CEO job is a unique position in the organization. And it presents a whole set of new challenges that non-CEOs don't get in their day-to-day career. And what I mean by that is, we tend to think of an organization as a triangle. There are lots of people at the bottom of the triangle, and then you spend your career and you kind of work your way to the top of the triangle. And you kind of imagine that the person at the top, the CEO, well, everyone works for the CEO. And when you become the CEO, you realize that that's only half the equation. Yes, this triangle is full of people who work for you. But in fact, there's another triangle upside down, if you can imagine that, where you're the one person at the bottom, and there's tons of people trying to tell you what to do. You've got a board of directors trying to tell you what to do. You've got investors trying to tell you what to do. You've got, depending if you're a public company, you've got analysts, you've got the media, you've got a whole galaxy of people and stakeholders who see you as the one point of contact. And so the CEO, more than anyone else in the organization, gets atomized across all these stakeholders that need to get managed. And so if you have not yet experienced that aspect of being the CEO, get ready for it. And secondly, get organized for it, because it does fragment the time of the CEO across lots of different issues and lots of different stakeholders. And you need a management team that is going to help you manage that dynamic depending on where you put your attention.
Thanks, James. That's really great advice, and good luck to David with his new role as CEO there as well. Thank you for A question from Paul Redmond, who says, James, thank you for a fantastic speech. Do you think the changes we have seen in the workplace since the start of the pandemic, such as working from home, etc., are here to stay, or will the world of work revert back to pre-2020 norms?
Great question. I wish I knew the answer, but here's two thoughts. One, it's a belief of mine. It's important for our business, but I think it's also important in terms of how organizations work, that humans are social creatures. When the pandemic started and said, well, investors would ask me, well, what do you think about the half of your business that is out of the home? I went, the vast majority will come back, if not all of it, because we are social creatures. We want to get out and about. I mean, wherever you are in the world, you have your own anecdotes and examples. Whenever lockdown ended, everyone rushed back out to do things, whatever that was. Restaurants and bars were full or whatever. We're social creatures. And I think that's true largely for the workplace too. Now, having said that, of course, there are some people who are more than content to not be very social. And so many of them, or some of them, would like to work more remotely for longer. And I think the success of the great work from home experiment for the white collar, of course, those running our factories and driving the trucks were always out in the field anyway. But the white collar success of work from home, I think, will inject greater flexibility into the workplace. And I think each industry and each company and each department within companies are going to find their balance point of how that works out. There'll be some departments where people can work from home or work remotely a lot and only come together occasionally. And there will be other departments and other industries where they'll need to be in the building much more often. And the other example I give of how to think about it is, if you're in the selling business, selling whatever you like, services or products, the first time the person who wins the sale was the one who went there in person versus you who did it remotely, I'm pretty certain you'll go physically the second time. So I think there's a competitive dynamic to this, and which is about human nature. So will the workplace be different? Yes. Do I think there's going to be more remote elements? Yes. Do I think ultimately there'll be much more getting together than we have today? Yes. It might look slightly different and slightly more flexible than what we have, and it'll be different by industry and department. And so there's no one size fits all answer to that.
Thank you, James. Yeah, it certainly is a different world than pre-2020. So thank you for answering that. Another question that's come in is, how are you managing the acceleration of digitalization in CPG? Any tips for companies working with consumers and intermediaries or distributors?
Yeah, I mean, digitization is changing. It's certainly changing everything. I think there are a couple of aspects to this. So one is, whatever part of CPG you're in, generally CPG sells through someone else. That's not always true. There are plenty of consumer companies that have direct relationships with consumers. But generally you're selling through someone else, whether that's a physical or a digital retailer. So how you maintain the relevance of your brands with the consumer. In other words, where are the eyeballs? Where are people in terms of marketing and being engaged with it? If it's no longer the television or it's no longer the radio, where is it? And moving that engagement to the platforms where people are. Secondly, the digitization of interaction with the retailer, whether it's an online retailer or even a physical retailer with a digital aspect to it. That's changing profoundly, which of course then feeds into the third aspect, which is you need to digitize your own internal business. There's no way you can be effective, engaging consumers in a much more digital fashion, wherever that may be, and working with online or digitally enhanced retailers if you don't have your own internal systems set up to do that. And companies only change their enterprise IT systems once every 15, 20 plus years. And so there are a lot of companies whose systems are just not capable of operating in the modern era
with the retailers and consumers. I mean, we ourselves, you know, I have just turned on an update to our enterprise IT systems. The last time we did an IT you know, mega change of the system was 1999. So here we are in we actually turned it on last year, 2021. And that's going to, you know, greatly enhance our ability to engage in this modern world. But, you know, these things that are only done every 15 or 20 years, if you don't have the right system, it's very hard to do the first couple of things.
Fantastic, thanks, James. We have a question here from Kamal, who says, James, I think I was at Liverpool at the same time as you. Which clubs did you join at the Guild and why? And if and how was that influential to where you are today?
Sure. Well, I'm sure you hopefully enjoyed your time and you understood my comment about the Casbah. I don't know if you've seen it recently. I mean, I joined. I mean, like many freshers, I joined tons of clubs in Freshers Week, most of which I only went to once, and I'm not sure merit to mention. The ones that the one that I got most out of, I joined a society that I'm not even sure still exists. I'm going to assume yes, called ASEC, which was a kind of a business society. It actually was an international business society. That was actually very interesting. It was probably the gateway of me switching from thinking about being an electronic engineer to thinking about going into business. It offered the opportunity both to kind of engage with businesses in different ways, have to organize things, and actually talk to people in other countries about business. So that was the one that probably, you know, I spent most time in and was most connected, and probably most made a difference other than any of the social ones.
Thank you. So Nathan Ferguson has asked, what does a typical day look like for the CEO of Coca-Cola?
Well, I think the trick is in the question. There's no such thing as a typical day other than in the last 2 years of COVID, where it involved looking at a computer screen, because there's so many things that I get involved in. Back to my comment about the two triangles, there's all the people who work for the company and there's all the people who've got a point of view about what the company would do. So if anything, my typical day is actually lots and lots of interactions with a whole vast universe of different people. And what I'm ultimately focused on is, you know, what's happening? Is there anything structural changing that means I should change my overall strategic kind of narrative and set of priorities? Hopefully that's less frequent than more frequent. And secondly, you know, who do I need to connect amongst the teams with each other so they can get through lots of these issues? And then of course there's a third set, which is kind of giving direction. I think you need X or Y to happen. But the biggest characteristic, other than the video screen of the COVID years, is meeting a vast array of people of all different shapes, sizes, nationalities, and interests.
Wonderful, thank you. We're coming to a really important question here now from Paul Broadhurst, who says, do you follow the English Premier League? And if so, who do you support?
Well, this is obviously a very controversial question. I have to say that as I grew up in Birmingham, and my dad took me to Aston Villa as a young child, I stuck with Aston Villa as kind of like, I kind of made the decision that one either supports your local team because that's where you went with your dad, or you chose the team that was the opposite of your dad's, one of the two, and you stuck with that, or you were influenced by the kind of the marketing of you know, some of the teams like Man United, and you know, you join them. But I have to say, when I was in Liverpool and subsequently since then, I've always had a fondness for Liverpool. I have a lot of friends who are big Liverpool fans, so I follow that as well as a kind of a joint team. But it would be unfair for me not to call out the kind of my Zen training of being an Aston Villa fan, where, you know, they may be one of the most successful teams in all history, except for all of that happened before I was born. And since then, they have been epically mediocre.
Yeah, there's a good answer to that, and hopefully they're on their way back a little bit now with Steven Gerrard in charge. So yeah, fingers crossed.
There you go, another Liverpool connection.
Yeah, there we go. A question from Gwyn, who says, "Hi James, what do you foresee as the new normal?"
What do I foresee as the new normal? That's a $1 million question there, Glenn. I'm a great believer in kind of structural things. In other words, the world doesn't change that often. You know, what is fundamentally we were having a debate. This is a tangent. We were having a debate about, you know, consumers and what they were interested in, and someone reminded me of a quote from, you know, the Greek philosophers, you know, 2,500 years ago, basically saying, well, teens are useless, they disrespect their elders, they don't do what they're told, blah 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 blah. In other words, making the point that some things haven't changed at all. And that, you know, old people just complain about teenagers, but that's been true for thousands and thousands of years. And I use that example as a way of saying there are many things in life about human nature and the nature of the laws of economics, to the extent they're laws, that are unchanging, and that are profound and structural, and they don't change very often and they don't evolve very often. And yet things do change. And so this balance of not being so kind of like, well, things don't change, that you don't evolve. And I'm not kind of well, everything's going to change. And sometimes the investment narrative becomes, well, this is a new world and everything's different. I can remember the dot-com boom when it was like, well, this time it's different. And of course it wasn't. Same with the financial crisis. You know, this time money can be free forever, but no, it can't. And so that's why I made the point about the book about Money for Nothing, that this combination of trying to separate what is structural and what is changing structurally from what is noise and what is temporary is a critical part, I think, of being a CEO. And that's what I think the new normal is going to be about. There are going to be some things that are very different for the next few years, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be true for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And when one is, you know, constructing a huge business system with a lot of capital, the money goes towards those things that are true for 10, 20, and 30 years, and not so much to those things that are just going to be true for 1 or 2 or 3 years.
Thanks, James. We're coming to the end of the event, so thank you so much for answering all these fantastic questions, and apologies again, we haven't got through them all. So I just wanted to finish with kind of a two-part question, really, which was, did you have a mentor who helped to direct your professional path? And what would your final piece of advice for students be before you leave?
I did sort of have a mentor. I mean, it was never a kind of a formal, well, I'm your mentor and you're the mentee kind of thing. But I certainly was lucky through my career that, you know, more senior, more experienced leaders took the time to kind of give advice. I mean, it's not like, you know, a daily, weekly, or even a monthly thing, but would give advice that was important. You know, ultimately, whether I took it on board and used it was up to me. But there were people, and it did help, you know, make those odd nudges along the way that I think were very fun. And I still speak and have dinner with many of them as I go around the world. And so that certainly was formative. And then, you know, advice to students, well, everyone's different. So I'm not sure there's one piece of advice that kind of fits everyone. But I would go back to what I said about being comfortable with your decision. You know, whatever job you're going to go for, whatever work-life balance, whatever financial ambitions you have, more, whatever it is, being comfortable with that balance. And then second point is remembering that it isn't forever. Like whatever you decide at the beginning, you don't have to stick with it forever. And that goes along with whatever you think the answer is today. As life goes on, your point of view will change. And so, you know, don't get like completely crazy about, well, I've got to make this one decision that's true for the next 50 years, because it very rarely is. It's just a question of starting the journey.
Thank you, James. And yeah, that brings the end of our event. We just want to say a huge thank you to yourself, James, for giving up your invaluable time. We're really honoured to have you back at the university speaking. It's a fantastic insight to your career. So thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you to Brian as well for putting the questions to James at the start of the event. We really appreciate your time as well. And thank you to everyone for attending as well. It's been one of our most popular events, and we really appreciate all your questions and for joining our event wherever you are in the world as well. That's one of the true benefits of this pandemic, really, is how we've been able to connect with each other across the globe. So thank you for joining us. Just a quick mention as well that we're hoping that this is the start of our new US alumni network, which we have a lot of different networks across the globe, and we're hoping to replicate this in the US. So in partnership with Brian, we're hoping to announce a new event for our US graduates in the coming weeks as well. So I'd ask that you please keep an eye out for your emails on some new events as well. And hopefully it's the start of a successful new alumni chapter in the US as well. Just a final thank you very much to James, to Brian, and for everyone attending. Yeah, have a great rest of the day, and thanks for joining us today. Thank you, James.
Thank you. Cheers.